Welcome to Recast, presented by the Baptist Union of Scotland. Each episode will look at a key issue of mission or discipleship for church leaders in Scotland. We will be bringing you key voices, practical insights and unique stories, all focused on the church in Scotland.
Welcome everybody to Recast. I'm Lisa Holmes. I'm just being trusted to do this on my own today because Glenn is away on holidays. And so we're going to do something a bit different. We're going to have some mini podcasts interviewing some interesting people and some of the things that they are doing around the nation. And we hope that you'll enjoy these short podcasts over the next few weeks. So today we have with us Rachel Conway-Doel, and it's really lovely to have you joining us again. Rachel, some of you people will remember you from Canopy this summer up at Dunblane High School. Rachel, tell us where you are and what you're up to at the moment.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So I work with BMS World Mission. I'm based down in Leeds at the moment. And my job title is the Overseas Team Leader for Relief. So that means I look after and oversee all of BMS World Mission's disaster relief work, any recovery work we do, and working with our partners when they're facing times of crisis. So at the moment, I'm working very much with the European Baptist Federation, EBF, supporting them in their response to the Ukraine war across the region.
That sounds like a pretty demanding role. Is your background in that kind of area?
So I've grown up with BMS, really. So I studied geography and international development at university, and my passion has really grown through the years for helping Baptists talk to each other. We're not very good at that sort of thing often, but recognizing that actually as a church and as a family of churches, we've got so much that we can offer to each other and support each other in these sort of times of crisis. And my passion for mission and overseas work and supporting different communities around the world really came from when I was very young, actually, and I had my school was connected with a school in South Africa, and I was part of the Pen Pal group and that sort of thing, and that really expanded my horizons, really, and just opened my eyes to the world around us.
Yeah, sounds like you're in the perfect job for you. So tell us something that's just a little bit unusual about you. That's maybe something you do in your spare time or something you enjoy. Or...
That's a risky
It's
question.
A very risky question.
I used to live on a canal boat.
Oh, did you?
Yes. So for several years. This is clearly not a canal boat. Probably the space I'm in now is probably as big as or bigger than what we used to live in.
Yeah.
But we used to live on a canal boat on the Oxford Canal and moved around, which was great. We loved it.
Yeah, in good company with Alan and Ruth Donaldson on their canal boats then as well. So when you came to Canopy, we were talking together about lessons we can learn from the church in a war zone. And obviously we could have chosen a number of different places around the world. Sadly, it's all too many to choose from. But obviously we are focusing significantly on Ukraine, and really conscious that as we're talking today, we're over 150 days into that war that I think all of us hoped would be finished, didn't we? And so, I know you've been out there and obviously it's part of your role as well, but maybe there's some lessons or things that maybe we could learn or benefit from hearing about in our lives in Scotland, in the UK, from the church in Ukraine. I just wondered if you could give us some windows into that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time, and it's a really and don't get me wrong, everything that is happening is absolutely horrific. The levels of violence, levels of destruction, we've not seen this in this region for so many years, and it's appalling what is happening. And at the same time, what is happening within the church is actually really exciting. I think from my role and what I've seen in lots of different places, in the midst of all this violence, of all the stress and trauma, the church is really stepping up across the region to be a real light and a real witness to God's love, really, which is, just the thing that's needed at this time, just some semblance of hope and love and in the world and community. And I think when we come out of this, whenever that will be, and hopefully it will be soon, I think there will be, we've heard of lots of incredible stories already of people doing amazing things, but I think there'll be even more stories of things that will be happening, and that's quite exciting. But I think the thing that I took away, I had the privilege of traveling to Poland to see some of the refugee centres there, and then I went on into Lviv as well, in Ukraine, to kind of meet with some of the Baptist Union team there and see some of the work they were doing. And that was back in April, so a little while ago now. And later this summer, I'll be going to Moldova and Romania to meet with some of the churches there. So it'll be interesting to see some of the differences. But whilst I was in, when I came back from Lviv, actually in Ukraine, lots of people were kind of saying, "Oh, it must have been a really, really stressful, really terrible time. How was it like? You must have seen some terrible things." And I've had to explain to quite a lot of people that Ukraine's actually quite a big country. It does take quite a long time to get from one place to another, and that's not to say Lviv has not had, not been impacted, and it has had strikes on it, and there has been, some terrible incidents that's happened. But it's by no means the front line. So I'm not some kind of hero driving to the front line of the war. We did have air raid alarms that happened, and that was quite insightful for me myself, actually, where we the air raid alarms would go off at night, and you'd have to come out of the place we were staying, go across the road, go down into the bunker, kind of wait for however long. I think it was 45 minutes to an hour, the two times it happened for us. And it was insightful in the sense of just the disruption to your day, the waking up and the kind of adrenaline that kicks in, and the okay, right, this is happening, need to get across, need to get to some place of safety, and and it was a tiny glimpse of the reality for some people, but the tiny glimpse of reality of this is happening several times in the night for some places in Ukraine, and has been for the last however many months. And you can see when you start to put that into perspective and into people's lives that this is happening to, that it's exhausting, it's terrifying. You can see why some people have just stayed in bunkers for weeks on end, because it's just not not safe. And the reality was that Lviv didn't get hit those nights. It was elsewhere that got hit, so we were very safe. But just that anticipation and the ongoing trauma and the kind of the stresses of life, were quite insightful, I think, and just gave a different outlook on kind of what everyone is facing across the country. And I think in Lviv, we were talking to the union and the team there, and there's some incredible people. There's some really faithful leaders, some really incredible leaders that are really wise as well. Even before the escalation of the invasion, because this has been happening since 2014. In reality, I think we often forget about that. They've been supporting churches in the east of the country that have already been affected by this conflict, to provide emergency items and support. And before the escalation in February, they had been starting to talk as a leadership team about what happens if this gets worse. What do we do? So they'd already been starting to talk to churches across the country to say, you might want to start thinking about this. You might want to start stockpiling some stuff. And I think that was quite interesting, because I think often we're in churches, certainly in the UK, we can often be a bit scared of the unknown, or the kind of anticipating things and going, oh, this seems like it could be quite complicated or quite scary. But actually, the reality is the fact that they prepared and the fact that they went, this might happen, meant that the churches in Ukraine have been at the forefront of the humanitarian response, really. I was talking to some other charities, some big international charities a few weeks ago, and it was a couple of months actually, and they were talking about, they were going in to start setting up some of their offices and start their HR processes and recruit some people. And this was in May. This was in May, and they hadn't started that yet. And I was thinking, oh, that's great for you. That's really good. But we've actually been operational since before the 24th of February, and that was quite poignant for me, because I think it really highlighted the fact that as churches around the world, we're really well placed as a community, as a global community, to respond to things that are happening. We know our communities, there's a presence there, there's relationships, there's understanding, there's knowledge, you know who to talk to, who not to talk to, who you need to keep on side, who's very willing to volunteer, all those sorts of things. And I think that's been really, really illustrated in this response. And I don't know whether people realize, but the Baptist Union of Ukraine is the biggest Baptist union in Europe. And it's actually one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Protestant grouping in Ukraine itself. So it is really significant. It's about 2,500 churches that are in a network across the country that are responding. And I think, what has also been really interesting, again, people have kind of been saying, oh, how's the church doing? And how are they coping? And seeing even just normal life in kind of daily life in Lviv was quite insightful as well, because the reality is that people are getting on with life. I think all of us will probably have some experience of this from the COVID lockdowns and stuff. When there is something that disrupts your norm so much, to such a degree, as human beings, we try and crave normality and try and create routines. So in Lviv, we went to church in the morning, and it was the first Sunday that the Sunday schools were back on, and so the children went out. They did a little presentation at the beginning. They went out to their kind of classes. There was a lunch for those that were staying in the church that were refugees. We walked around the city afterwards, and the coffee shops were open. There was street jazz going on. There was kind of normal life was running. And I think that's what we've also seen in the churches. I was talking to a couple of the leaders and follow some of their work on social media as well. And the other week they'd organised a pastors' conference. They've had baptisms and weddings and marriage courses and marriage prep courses and things like that. Things that I think is quite hard for us sitting here to kind of fathom how, amidst kind of all this trauma, you would have the energy or kind of will to organize a marriage prep course, for instance. But for them, as churches and as communities, these are things that are normal and they're important, and why would you stop them? And so I think that's probably been one of the biggest or is one of the biggest lessons that I think comes out of this, is that life continues and the church continues as well. And I think that's quite exciting.
I think it is. And I think, that whole thing about the church being so located in its community and rooted and related, it is such a thing that all of us can identify with, isn't it? And I don't know about you, but I put on my BBC News app and then think, oh, I wonder why I did that. Because, most of the news is quite frightening and quite impacting. And obviously the situation in Ukraine impacts globally as well into our own nation, and also, into poorer countries as well. And so, but we're there in the midst of that, experiencing the same as everyone else, but with hope and love and grace and mercy to share with people within our community. I think that's kind of a good and encouraging thing to take out of this. How can we pray? I mean, some of the stuff I've been reading over the last few days actually appears that maybe things are going to get worse again. How might we best pray for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine at this point?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it's really hard to know sometimes how to pray, as you say, in times like this, because it's so alien, I guess, to all of us. I think there is something about, I think first of all, and before kind of prayer points, I think that first of all, there's something to say that actually when they hear that people are praying for them, it just encourages them so much. And if you ask them kind of what they need, kind of, as well as we'd love some more money to be able to kind of provide more support, actually the biggest request is prayer, because they know they can only do this with God's support. So I think the Ukrainians' number one prayer request would be for the war to end.
Yes.
So I think that is a genuine prayer request that gets repeated all the time. But then I think there's a need to pray for the leaders and for the different church leaders as well. Although life kind of goes on, it is exhausting. It's very tiring. It's very you're very involved. It's very mentally draining. So prayer for all of them as they're making decisions about what to do, how to support, how to continue their kind of ongoing ministry. The churches that had thriving ministry with people with addictions and things like that, and they're still trying to support all those sorts of communities as well that they were ministering to before the escalation. So prayers for the leaders of the union and the churches, but prayers also for their kind of ongoing ministries, that they can continue to serve some of the people they were serving prior to the escalation. There is a real need for working out how they can support churches and people and communities across the country. Resources such as money. However, the fundraising efforts across Europe have been absolutely phenomenal, and the generosity of churches has been incredible. The reality is, I think, however much money churches raised, it would not be enough.
Sure.
Just because of the extent of the devastation. So I think for wisdom for churches about how they can use the resources they have in ways, in the best ways, in creative ways, in innovative ways, in ways that are still going to support the people that are most in need. So I think those would be some of the top prayer requests as well.
That's really helpful, Rachel. And I imagine that there's more information on the BMS website and also the EBF as well. And they're still doing their prayer meetings every Wednesday evening. And as the Baptist Union of Scotland, we are supporting Yura Fedoryov, who's a church planter as well in Ukraine. So it'd be good if people were praying for him particularly and their ministry. Are there any other resources that people can access?
I think those are some of the best ones. I think, as BMS, we've put together in conjunction with the EBF some videos, and we showed one of those at Canopy for people. They're perhaps slightly longer than we would usually do, but they're really helpful kind of, I think, really helpful resources just for reflecting over and for kind of putting some faces to some of the stories. Each of the stories that we hear about is a person, it's a family, and I think some of those videos really help articulate that and kind of give a picture for our prayers as well. So I think those are, they're all on the websites.
Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you as well for what you are doing in your role for BMS. It sounds super challenging, and there's a huge amount of things to be done there. So we pray for wisdom for you as well in what you are able to do and also what you're not able to do. And as you communicate with the churches and get us on board with thinking about these things and praying for people in different nations. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.